We'll try now. Okay, so quick agenda. We'll do a little bit of an introduction. We'll talk about information warfare and nation states. Misinformation and mass influence is something that, like a lot of attacks, started out in the nation state and military realm and has now been democratized and can be done by anyone. Let me shut off this mic and go to the other mic.
Sorry, that one being weird for some reason.
Okay.
Try that.
Hello? I just actually have to talk into the mic. Can you hear me now? Good. Yeah, by Sprint. No, don't buy Sprint. We're going to talk a little bit about information warfare, nation states, how this got started, and how it became kind of more commonplace, and why we're seeing it now. How the influence actually happens. What are the mechanisms that allow for this? We'll talk about some of the mitigations and challenges to existing mitigations. We have attempted mitigations, not very well. And then we're going to talk about designing shared responses and a different way to look at this problem. We'll introduce you to AMIT, our misinformation security framework, and then we'll talk about how we built that and the way ahead. So, information warfare, nation states. Information warfare has been around since the dawn of time. Ramses II used information warfare against the Hittites, where he would paint these murals about what was going to happen during the war. The problem was that there was no transmission distance. You had to go to where the message was and see it. But back as far as Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, Sun Tzu said all warfare is based upon deception. Clausewitz said warfare is an act of force to compel the enemy to do our will. It's not to destroy things and hurt people. It's to change their minds. It's still influence. That's what really warfare is about. So, why are we sitting here talking about it in an information security conference? Where's the cyber? Well, if you look at information warfare, and it's a shame that they changed. The Department of Defense had this joint publication where they explained how the DoD did information warfare, and they had it very nicely broke out into these 5 pillars. So they had PSYOPs, computer network operations, or cyber, if you will, military deception, electronic warfare, operational security. And really, when you talk to pardon the expression, but the muggles, and they say cyber, usually what they mean is some combination of 2 or more of these pillars. So they mean psychological operations combined with computer network operations, or electronic warfare combined with computer network operations, or some combination therein. So when you look at cyber warfare, right, or information warfare, or cyberspace operations and offensive, they're all based on influence, right? At the end of the day, you want the adversary or the target to make decisions based upon information that you're showing them, you're hiding from them, that you're changing for them. You want to deny or degrade their information stream so they make decisions that are advantageous to you. Or you want to give yourself a leg up so that you enhance your decision-making process by giving yourself more information than you allow the adversary to have. Either way, if you're doing it on the internet, it's some form of influence. Very rarely is the end result that you're going for the effect on that box. It's usually on the air-breathing unit at the other end of that box. So let's talk a little bit about nation states. I'm not a political scientist. I'm a computer scientist. Are there any lawyers or political scientists in the room? Oh, good. Don't hate me. This is like the fat crayon version, Westphalian sovereignty is explained by a computer scientist. So most international law is still based upon the Westphalian model of the nation state, and there are 3 basic precepts of it. The first one is that each nation has sovereignty over its own territory and domestic affairs. So I'm a country, I'm a nation state, my territory, the things that happen inside the territory, nobody should be messing with that. Those are mine. The second principle is that non-interference. Don't mess with my internal affairs, I won't mess with your internal affairs. And the third one is that each nation is equal under the law, regardless of size. Now, I want to skip ahead a little bit, and I don't want to go down a hole of whether or not the Russian influence attacks actually changed votes or changed the result of the election, but I think we can all agree that there was at least an attempt to influence those elections. I would say that those elections are internal affairs, therefore sovereign affairs, and had this been done by dropping leaflets into Times Square as opposed to memes on Facebook, we would be having an entirely different discussion. We would absolutely not put up with that. So part of our question is, why do we put up with it on the internet? So nation states do try to influence each other, and if you work in government, you work in the military, they break it out, they call it the dime model. So these are kind of the big heavy levers that nation states can pull to influence other nations. So there's diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And you go, well, that's great. I'm not government. I work for a corporation. Why do I care? Well, it turns out that you've got very similar levers if you're a corporation. So the diplomatic, you've got business deals and strategic partnerships. Your informational instrument is your PR and your advertising. Most corporations don't have militaries. However, not all mergers and acquisitions are friendly, right? Anybody that's been offered to be bought out by a large corporation like Facebook or Google and turned it down and then found out that they have a competing product that's almost just like yours would think that that is not necessarily a friendly thing. And the last one is the economics. So your research and development and your capital investments are certainly a way that you can affect your business sector and your competitors. So these things do correctly apply. So let's go back to the nation state thing for a minute. Most of us, anybody here not live in a democracy or something relatively close to a democracy? Oh, good. I'm glad we still kind of agree that in theory we're supposed to be there. So Bruce Schneier actually wrote this great paper about a year ago, and he talked about, well, you know, if you're going to really attack a democracy or an autocracy, what do you do? And it turns out that a democracy requires that we have a common political knowledge. It requires that all of the members of that democracy agree on who the rulers are, that the rulers are there legitimately, they were legitimately elected, and they understand how the government is supposed to work, right? And those things are transparent. The things that we disagree on are things like, well, you know, how much government influence do we want in my retirement or my medical care or you know, the types of weapons that I buy. And those kind of disagreements, that contested political knowledge, is how we as democracies solve problems. And we can do it that way because we all understand how the government works and how leaders were elected. Until you get to influence that deals with the elections, now people start to question the legitimacy of our elected officials. So these are foundational attacks on the things that make our democracies work. So what's different? Why now? I just said that influence has been around since the dawn of man. What's changed? Well, let's go back. Let's go forward from Ramses, where I mentioned he did the mural with the hieroglyphs. Let's go forward to papyrus. You used to be able to, if you were the church or the state, you would have these learned people that were literate, which was very uncommon at the time. And you could get parchment or scrolls, which were hard to come by, and ink, which was hard to come by. And they could mass produce, mass in quotes, messages for you by hand copying these manuscripts and then giving them to messengers and having those messengers ride out by horse or sail and transmit that message. And so transmission was limited, who could transmit the message was limited, and who could receive it was limited because you could only make so many copies, you could only travel so far. And when it got there, again, literacy wasn't very common. So you fast forward to the 1440s and you get the Gutenberg press and movable type. And this allows for further mass reproduction. It takes a while to set up the press, but once you set it up, you can mass produce things quickly, but they still have to be carried. These presses are still expensive. Literacy is becoming a little bit more common, so more people can receive the message, but the number of people that can mass transmit is still very small. Move forward again to the telegraph. And the telegraph requires infrastructure. So now what's needed is that you need to be within range of a telegraph station. You need to convince that telegraph station to transmit for you, which requires specialized knowledge of Morse code. And then this is key. Your recipient has to know to go get the message, right? Pony Express didn't exist, right? Brown didn't help you. They didn't come by with your telegram and just hand it to you at your door. You had to go to the telegraph station. But now you can transmit at near the speed of light over long distances. You go to radio, and the Marconi radio, and now the Marconi radio allows you to transmit at very long ranges, and it requires no specialized knowledge to receive the message. You just need a radio and to tune it into the frequency, and you can get it in your home. Now, something interesting happened about this time. Let me go back a second to the Gutenberg press. One of the things that the church and the state probably didn't account for is the fact that once the press is out there, right? Yeah, it's expensive, but I'm guessing the Catholic Church didn't foresee Martin Luther printing his 95 Theses on a Gutenberg press and nailing them all to all the churches, right? When Marconi invented the radio and people listened to the news on the radio, they probably didn't foresee that a lot of people would mistake the War of the Worlds for actual news and panic. So we fail to account for the fact that these mass transmission mediums can be misused, abused, or misinterpreted. So we move forward from the radio, you now go to television, and for the first time, you can now transmit not only spoken or written word, but you can actually transmit pictures and sounds. And really, up until the mid-90s, this was the predominant way to reach the public. Now, if you wanted to reach the American public, if you were an American living in the United States in the 1980s, you can't just walk down to your television station and go, well, I'd like to do a news broadcast. It doesn't work that way. You better be somebody like the President of the United States that says, look, you're going to put me on at 7 o'clock because I'm doing a presidential address, or I'm going to pull your FCC license and transmit. And so, again, wide audiences, you can reach right to people's homes, requires no specialized knowledge. They don't need to know a priori that the message is coming, but you still have to be somebody of import to transmit. So what's different now? What's different now is that social media has democratized talking to the masses. You have to be no one of import to get out a message to a mass populace. And we live in a world where Katy Perry, God bless her, has roughly twice the number of followers as the President of the United States and 50 times the number of followers of the Prime Minister of Britain. And she doesn't have to answer to anybody before she reaches her 107, almost 108 million followers right now. And so that's what's different. We don't have authoritative sources anymore, and anybody can transmit to a mass populace, and they can do it instantly. So what's really going on here is powers that used to belong to the nation state now belong to the individual. So the good news is the internet, as conceived to give everybody a voice, worked. The bad news is the internet, as conceived, gave everybody a voice. So now that we understand that we can all transmit, how does that actually work? How do these mechanisms of influence happen? Well, it turns out that if you're going to be on social media and you're going to transmit mass influence, you need certain resources. You need certain types of accounts. And this is not all-inclusive. These are some basic types. So the first one that you've got is bots. Bots are relatively stupid accounts. They don't create content. What they do is they amplify content. They like, they retweet, and they otherwise send out your content. Parody accounts are exactly that. They're parodies of real people, real organizations. They are not intended to be misrepresent the actual entity. They're not intended to deceive you into thinking that they're the actual entity, but it happens. The next one up is a spoof. These are intended to somewhat fool people that they're the legitimate account. I think it's funny that the president's Twitter account is the real Donald Trump. And it's the real Donald Trump because if you put in Donald Trump on Twitter, go have fun going through the accounts. There's some really entertaining ones there, right? So those are intended to actually have you believe that they're the real person. Camouflage accounts are used to infiltrate certain groups. So if there's a group whose narrative you want to change, pick any group, the Scouts of America, then you create an account and you camouflage as a member or an interested party so you can get invited to the chat groups, inside of the news groups, inside of the information exchanges so that you can take in the narrative and hopefully steer the narrative in some way. Deep cover accounts should never, ever be discovered if they're done correctly. Those are very, very time intensive. They're very expensive. You can't just go out now and create a brand new persona on the internet because somebody's going to go around and do a Google search and go, this person didn't exist 6 months ago. And they're telling me that they're a 35-year-old that's been working in government forever, right? It just smells fishy. So these take a long time to create. They require substantial knowledge, substantial resources. But the most dangerous one is the takeover. The takeover is when the legitimate account of a legitimate person or organization is taken over. In 2013, the Associated Press Twitter account was hijacked. Somebody tweeted out that there was a bombing at the White House and President Obama had been injured. and the Dow Jones fell so precipitously that it tripped the circuit breakers. They had to suspend trading. And that was October of 2013. So those are the really dangerous ones. So now I've got these accounts, what do I do with them? Well, we say that there's 5 tactics. We call them the 5 Ds: distort, dismiss, distract, divide, and dismay. So I'll walk through these. I'll give you some very brief examples. Hopefully they're not too abrasive or disturbing. So distort is when you take a fact and you distort the actual fact. No. The Russians aren't invading the Ukraine. We're freeing and protecting ethnic Russians. Dismiss, you're presented with a fact, you just outright dismiss it, don't deal with it. China famously uses this all the time. They're routinely accused of stealing intellectual property by the United States and industrial theft and espionage, and their standard response is, not only do we not do that, but we are the poor victims of American aggression and hacking. You are the greatest offenders out there. Distract is you don't deal with the narrative presented to you, you create a new narrative. So MH17 was reportedly shot down by Russian missiles. The Russians said they didn't even address it. What they said is, wow, I wonder why a commercial airliner was flying over a combat zone. Right? Divide, you take the population, you divide them into 2 polarizing groups, and you have them fighting with each other. If they're fighting with each other, they're not paying attention to what you're doing. And the last one is dismay. Those are ad hominem and personalized attacks. And those attacks are so personal that you can't even address them. In trying to address it and saying that the attackers were ridiculous, you lend it credence. So who remembers the Pizzagate scandal? Right? Yes, the upper elite of the government have a secret sex dungeon in the basement of a pizza parlor. It's like, I can't even address that, right? Just by addressing it, I'm lending credence to the attack and the person making the attack. So, what are mitigations? The only defense against these kind of things is to really understand why they happen, how they happen, and start kind of working your way down the line and seeing what things you can affect there to kind of break that kill chain or break that process. So the first way you've historically done this is by using fact checkers. So either manual or automatic fact checkers. So everybody here, I'm assuming, is familiar with either PolitiFact or Snopes, right? We've all probably used those. Those are manual. The automated ones work in similar ways. They take a purported fact, they split it up into a triplet, and then they use one of 2 models, either an open world model or a closed world model. And here's the difference. In an open world model, you can introduce new facts and they're assumed true unless later you find out that they run amiss of another accepted fact. In a closed world model, you assume that all new purported facts are false until you can verify them with previously approved facts. Neither of those models is ideal, right? So in InfoSec, we would call these either whitelisting or blacklisting, and they're not ideal. And they definitely don't deal with things like editorials and satire. And God knows we never find any of those things in the news when we turn on the TV or on Facebook or on Twitter or on any of the social media. So this totally works. So moving on to social media, you can look at things like propagation-based detection. So hop-based cascade and time-based cascade. So if you look at the graphs there, the top graph on the left there is fake news, and the top right one is confirmed news. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to why the fake news has multiple peaks and the real news has only 1 peak?
Lots of shares.
Lots of shares by whom?
Botnets.
By botnets, right? So we talked about those bots that periodically re-amplify messages, and so that's what ends up happening, right? Real news comes out in the news cycle, it's accepted as fact, we see it, everybody understands it, and it goes out, we're on to the next news cycle. Fake information is periodically re-amplified because they want to keep it in the public consciousness. Now, because it's periodically re-amplified, what ends up happening is every time it gets re-amplified, it reaches broader and broader networks. And so what that does is that actually affects the cascading. So if you go to the bottom ones, the green line there is real news, and the red line is false news. Okay, and so what ends up happening is you end up reaching a broader network with the fake news, again, because every time a new bot re-amplifies, you reach new parts of social media, new accounts that hadn't seen it before. So it's fairly easy to tell these things. The last model there is the epidemic diffusion model. And that's that little flow chart there. That is a model that comes from tracking infectious diseases. And so RC is your rate of contact with false information. RF is the rate at which the subject is infected. And RC is the rate at which they're cured. Now, this is a nice, simple model, but the problem is that we really don't understand what's the catalyst that takes somebody from, okay, this time that I'm in contact with the false information, I'm actually going to believe it and become infected. We don't understand why that transition happens, why that phase shift happens. So I think most people can understand the model, but it's arguable how useful it is. So when you take a look at these, they're all kind of fall short. We now have more devices on the internet than we have people on the planet. The rate at which we create information is huge. The Internet Minute infographic gets worse and worse every year. And really, you want to determine if something is false news, ideally before everybody else sees it. But you're never going to be able to analyze the data and verify it as quickly as it's created. You're just not. So the speed analysis is a problem. The computational power that's required is a problem. You need a whole new internet plus some. There's a lack of common framework, or at least there was. We'll get to that shortly. There's a lack of understanding of the emergence of characteristics. Now, what do I mean by that? We understand fairly well in certain circles that, hey, after your 15th or 16th tweet, you're likely to believe something. What we don't understand is how much more do you believe it after your 16th tweet, your 3rd YouTube video, and your 4th Instagram post. We don't understand that. There's also a bit of cognitive friction and cognitive dissonance, and here's the difference. Misinformation works because you're already biased to believe it, right? If you fall for misinformation, you were probably already leaning that way. And so once you believe that, convincing somebody that what they believed is not correct is hard. That's that cognitive friction. And on top of that, there's that cognitive dissonance because they don't want to believe what you're now telling them is true. So it just doesn't sound true, it doesn't ring right. Those things are very hard to get over. So far we've been talking about social media and we've talked about leaflets. Anybody familiar with this copy of the Washington Post? So this was fascinating. This was an actual printed newspaper. It was actually distributed at Union Station in Washington, D.C. this past December. You could find it at the newsstands at the coffee shops. It is not a real Washington Post. It was a piece of psychological propaganda. It's the first time since World War II that the US populace has been the target of physical psychological operations products. It was put out by the Orange Group. They did leave little clues in it that it was not the real Washington Post, but it was convincing enough that the actual Washington Post felt compelled to release a story and put out via their official social media that this was not them. And they've since gone back and sued the group. So if people are falling for this, how's it going to work when we get to deepfakes? Right? You talk to the average citizen and you show them a video and they're inclined to believe that video, and you want to tell them, here are all of the metadata reasons why I can tell that that video is faked. What they're going to tell you is, I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and you're a government shill or you're a shill for whatever group, and you're trying to fool me. So this problem is really only going to get worse.
Okay, so data scientists end of things. So I would love to say we have this one ring to rule them all, beautiful data science solution. The answer is actually no. This is a cross-platform, across the world, huge community problem. It's going to take a big joined-up response to solve it. I have a clicker, cool. So we're going to need to build communities. And we spoke last year about the problems. This year we're going to talk about the things we've done. First thing we've done is we've created, co-opted, adapted communities. We've got some Misinfosec people in the room. David, you're one of them. Anyone else? Okay, I think we just got David lying around in here today. But we went out, we looked for people who were working on this boundary between misinformation and InfoSec. People who were applying InfoSec principles to misinformation, people who were looking at it in that light, and we threw them all into a channel together and got them talking to each other. I was one of the people who were at the founding of the Credibility Coalition, which is the standards body working on the standards for describing misinformation. We built a standards body within that for applying InfoSec principles to misinformation. The leads in that, just to give an idea of the variety in there, are an information operations person, a data scientist, a narrative warfare specialist, and a social scientist. Pablo and I are both part of the People-Centered Internet, who are working on misinformation at the government level. IRC, help me here.
International Association.
Thank you. Yeah, the ISAPs, bodies who are response bodies for cybersecurity incidents. But we're building communities on the left to deal with misinformation that include all of the people from the right, because these are all the people you need. Does this thing go any taller? Sorry. So, and the reason we're doing this is because we need not just to admire the problem. There are lots of people looking at misinformation events, and again, one of the problems is the words. So we started talking about incidents and going, oh, look, that's a nice incident, and not actually responding to it. So we need people to join up. One of the existing bodies is the ISACs, the Information Intelligence Sharing and Coordination Bodies, and the ISALs, which are the ones that the President doesn't have to sign off on. So we're talking about, sorry, I won't touch it again. So we're talking about misinformation, ISALs, response bodies, but actually it's better to talk about cognitive security. Because instead of focusing on the problem, you want to focus on the thing that you want. You want to secure these groups of brains. You want to secure the endpoints, which is people, communities, the things that are being attacked. So, and you also want to feed back to things like the financial, things like agriculture, all of the other communities that get affected by misinformation. Because it's not just misinformation for its own sake, it hits everywhere. And the reason you want to do this, again, is not just admire the problem, you actually want to respond to it. You want to start talking about, okay, I've seen an incident, I've seen the units of this incident, I've seen the parts of this incident, how can we start responding, how can we start being resilient to this? This is starting to sound familiar, this is starting to sound like InfoSec. We kind of thought so too. So, one thing we looked at was all the different views. So we found people who were looking at it as information security. So people like Dan Gordon, people like Gruck, people like Danny Rogers. We found people who were looking at it as an influence operations problem. So people like Lynn, people like Pablo. Yeah, I know, you're top end of it. We found people on both sides. So Pete Singer and Gerasimov in US and Russian, who were seeing it as conflict. Most people talking about misinformation, we're really seeing it as a social or political problem. You hear people talk about this as a political problem. You hear people talk about it originally. We talked about it as a media problem. It was like people were talking about fake news as though it was just like a news pollution. But they're all talking about the same thing, just from different angles. And that leads to the second problem, which was there was no common language. So, we've thrown all those people in the same place and got to talk to each other. And the second thing is, okay, let's start building a language. So we talk about incidents, we talk about campaigns as the longer scale, the 1 year, 2 year, things like the 2016 election, US election work is a campaign. But within it, you get things like Pizzagate, which is a smaller scale incident. Within that, you see artifacts, which are the messages, the users inside that. And there's a lot of argument about what misinformation actually is versus what disinformation actually is, and that's fine. We can have all those discussions, but we gotta go do stuff. And we don't have time to argue about definitions right now. We've got to go respond and fix. So we've just put up a working definition, got on with it. And the things we need, We need this lingua franca, but we also need to start those defenses. We need to counter-move. We need to counter-move against, if you see a reuse technique. For example, we've seen this hack, grab a document, adapt the document, leak it, used a few times. Not very well in France, which is wonderful. We see people building tools, defense tools. We'd like to know if they actually work. So let's start assessing those. Let's start worrying about the next thing. So far, a lot of the stuff we've seen has been pretty done. It's done, but it works. We haven't really seen much in the way of machine learning adaptation, this type of ML-sec attacks. That's going to come. I'm expecting 2020 to be quite exciting. And very much on the narrative level. At the moment, people are still talking about messages, artifacts, misinformation at that level. What's really happening out there is narrative warfare. People are fighting in terms of the stories that people have as their groundings. They're fighting on that level. They're fighting with memes, they're fighting with stories. And unless we're working at that level, we're losing. We're going to lose. And the things that we need behind this are those languages, those common languages. If we're going to join up, if we're going to join communities, if we're going to have these joined up responses, we need to be able to talk to each other across all of those communities. And the first piece of infrastructure we need is frameworks, is infrastructure. So the first piece we built was a framework structure. So meet out. Let's talk about this. So this is the pyramid. So I've already mentioned campaigns and instance and narratives and artifacts. Let's talk about what these things are. So this whole pyramid is what somebody designing misinformation campaigns sees. They are building this longer scale thing. They might be what Clint Watts calls an advanced persistent manipulator. So you've got an advanced persistent threat. They have a target, probably a target country, a thing they want to do. They might be a charm campaign like China. They might have a goal of weakening another country. They might have a secondary goal. They might have useful idiots on that secondary goal. For instance, if you are weakening a country through its vaccination scheme, there's certainly plenty of useful idiots in there. So you have this longer scale campaign. You build these smaller scale instances within this campaign. And then you use the narratives of that population. And you adapt those narratives. You target those narratives. You've just seen with shootings recently, there were original narratives and then suddenly there was counter narratives being pushed in, using the narratives of people and just adapting on top of those. And then you'll see the artifacts underneath that. You'll see individual messages, you'll see bots, but you'll see users, you'll see those useful idiots coming through. That's, as a designer, you'll see all of that. As a responder, you're going to start from the bottom. So InfoOps is going to come from the top. Data scientists come from the bottom. So you're going to see first the messages. You might see the bots, you might be lucky enough to see unusual activity. I mean, the days of seeing really dumb bots posting all the time, seeing these wonderfully fast rates, like screaming, hey, I'm a bot, look, are pretty much over. Now we're looking for the subtle things. Now we're looking for the subtle anomalies. But you're going to have to really fight from that artifact level up to the narrative level, up to the, okay, something's happening. And this is the same fight we have in MLSec. Very similar tooling's needed. So this is where we are. So you have attackers from the bottom down, from the top down, defenders from the bottom up, and the third set of people you don't see in here are the endpoints, the targets. Targets, the transmissions. So keep this in mind as we go through the next part. So it's a problem, but InfoSec has things we can use for this. We needed to build response, and we build response fast. And we looked around and we found frameworks and we found sticks. So there's already a set of messaging formats that connect up those top level InfoOps incidents level entities to those bottom level data science entities. So great, we can use this. And there are frameworks that already use this. So we found a bunch of stage-based models. So we settled on the cyber kill chain, which already uses sticks. So cyber kill chain with the attack framework underneath it. In fact, we looked at a whole bunch of frameworks. We looked really useful. They show you how people get radicalized. We looked at some of the existing models starting to come out for misinformation. And we took apart a bunch of that attack framework. Attack framework was useful because we have this idea of stages, but we also have this idea of techniques. For each stage, you can pull out individual techniques. So we were looking at, for instance, phishing. If you say phishing, you know what it is. You don't have to put in a long-winded explanation of this thing I've seen that involves email that. You just say phishing, and that's shorthand. So it's shorthand for the thing, it's a shorthand for the response that you've seen to the thing, it's a shorthand for who probably does it, and you can get on with actually responding to it. We want to do that with misinformation. So, next. So how do we build this thing? So we went and looked at existing campaigns, existing incidents. And we also looked at failed attempts. France has been wonderful because France is incredibly resistant to this, especially Russian attempts on France. They just kind of don't get it. There's a cultural problem there, which, great. Failures tell you stuff. So we found about 60-something different instances. Our first problem was that there wasn't a master list of misinformation incidents. And there certainly wasn't a master list of misinformation incidents that was in a standardized form, so we built one. And we picked out 22 of these. And we pulled out all of the techniques we could find in these. So, got a catalog. Here's one of them. It's one of the really early ones. The first one that I saw was 2010. Some of the early Russian tests were 2010, but this is 2014. Just a really simple one day. A bunch of people woke up in an area that had a bunch of chemical factories with a message on their phone saying there's been a fire. Panic. That was Colombian Chemicals. So this is, we built formats for how to describe things. We built formats for techniques. So this is one of the techniques. So now we can talk about paid targeted ads. What is it? When was it used? Who uses it? Which incidents were you used in? So we know that it was used in Brexit. And this is, we have a GitHub repo with the latest version of the AMP framework in it. So this is just one of the technique sheets from the repo. So you link this together. And the way we pulled this together was we just did this top-down, let's look at what we think the usual suspects are doing, and this bottom-up, what we've seen in terms of artifacts and techniques, build out this thing called AMP. You're not supposed to read this thing. There's a repo, go straight and see everything in gory detail. The top two lines are the big important ones. So the blue line is the stages. This is equivalent to the cyber kill chain. The next slide I'll show you has them in smaller detail. So these are 12 different stages that we think somebody creating a misinformation campaign will go through. The 4 above that is an aid memoir for ourselves. These are the 4 phases we think they belong to, and underneath that, the gray lines are the techniques that we found in those 22 campaigns, plus a few that when we ran through example campaigns, we realized we'd missed. So, phases and tactics. Part of this is that most of the people looking at misinformation campaigns only look at write a boom. So left a boom, right a boom. So write a boom is after an attack is visible, widely visible. So in this case, after this has hit the general public. That's when most people have seen the artifacts and when most of the analysis has happened. That's not when you want to really stop these things. You actually want to stop this at the planning stages, so the left of boom. So the left side, you've got planning a campaign, you've got some of the preparation work. So developing people, it's things like find your useful idiots. It's things like set up your botnets. It's things like set up your backstories for your trolls. And then micro-targeting, it's things like the ad network stuff. Most of this stuff leaves some form of trace. So how do we look for those traces? How do we stop at that level? So we've got a bunch of work going on left of boom. And other pieces that get missed, things like measuring effectiveness. So if you run one incident, you're going to run more incidents. So how do people do basic measures of effectiveness? How do they rerun? So this is phases tactics, and this is where to go find it. So misinfosec.org is where we're hiding out. And there's an issues list, so if you see stuff you want to add in, and we've put a CC license on it, so you can just pull it and use it. And I think this is where I hand it back to you. Oh, okay.
Okay, so now that we've told you that this is all horrifying and broken and you want to run and hide, we feel we should give you a little hope and go, okay, where do we go forward from here? So we created this framework. It was a small coalition of the willing. We'd like to get more of you involved. Take a look at what we've built, add on to it, disagree with us, help us to fix it. We want to grow that coalition. SJ and I are going to be leaving here at the end of this week, and we're going to be going up to DC to help various entities stand up a cognitive security information sharing and analysis organization. As that gets announced, be on the lookout for it. Convince your companies, your businesses, your corporations to join and to share threat indicators so that we can get a handle on this, and contribute at misinfosec.org. We want to continue to build that alert infrastructure. Again, it's easy for us to take kind of a US-centric view. Not everybody hears from the US. Certainly Europe, Asia, Africa, the rest of the world needs this because we're not the only targets. It would be great to have an international consortium that could do this.
We're helping with some Asian stuff. Okay,
That.
I know.
We need to refine the TTPs and framework. TTPs are techniques, tactics, and procedures. We looked at 22 scenarios. Certainly we don't know all of the campaigns that have happened. All of you have access to campaigns. I'm sure that we missed stuff. The really important work happens when you find not only the gaping holes, but when you get into these deeply held irrational religious arguments over whether this word means, this thing or this other thing. I'm a simple person. If it doesn't exist in the 8 box of Crayola crayons, I don't recognize it as a color. So we need some help there.
We've got a response meeting coming up soon, where we're going to be talking about response at the technique level, the tactical level, and the procedure level.
And then for those of you that are already sharing threat indicators using MITRE's attack framework, we are building schemas for sticks and taxis so that you can actually share those threat indicators amongst the various information sharing communities, intelligence sharing communities.
Oh, and just the back end, because this is a data science track, there are some really good data scientists out there on that artifact level. You should track these guys because they know what they're doing. And I guess this is because there's always references. This is us.
So this is pretty cool. I think it's awesome. Oh, sorry.
This is pretty cool. I think it's awesome to be able to plug into the Sticks Taxi framework and be able to maybe pull this stuff into tools like Anomaly. One of the questions that I have is, okay, awesome that we're doing this. Awesome that the things like the multi-state ISACs are going to have eyes on this. But what can government actually do? Because we have a First Amendment, there's, nobody trusts the government anyway if they say things are true or false. So, if you're sitting in a government position trying to deal with these threats, what do you actually do with the information?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. The short version is what does government do to solve the problem? And, again, speaking for myself, not for my employer, the government doesn't solve this problem, right? Industry and the community and the citizenry solve this problem. What the government can do is foster those relationships and provide resources and ways for the communities to have those conversations and to be able to share that information and provide intelligence and analysis to those things so that the people that can address these problems do address these problems. Some of these things are relatively easy to address. I'll just give you a very simple one. And this is not a panacea. There are lots of problems with this solution. But one of the problems right now with the internet, and this actually just happened a few weeks ago, I'm sorry, that's not true. This happened this past December. Somebody had taken, an ultra-right-wing blog had taken pictures that were legitimately taken by the Associated Press of the protests in Paris. And specifically, they took a picture that was published of a huge bonfire, and then they took a picture that was taken of a much smaller kind of trash can fire. And the narrative that this right-wing blog told was, this is the left-leaning news trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. These are both the same fire. And the Associated Press did it exactly right. Within a couple of hours on their official Twitter, they went back and they posted, I think it was about 19 tweets with the pictures going, here are the original pictures, they are pictures, here's the original stories that went with the pictures, here's an analysis, we're going to circle differences to show you that these pictures were taken at different times and different places, right? And the reason that the right-wing blog was able to do that is when you look at media on a website, you don't know who actually published it, right? You don't know what the original narrative. Wouldn't it be great if we could digitally sign our media with a cert so that I could right-click on it and go, yes, this picture was taken by the Associated Press, and as part of that signature was the hash of the original URL. So I could go back and read the original story and go, okay, does the narrative that I'm being told now match with the original narrative? If yes, great. If not, this person signed it, right? The Associated Press signed it. The other one did not. Or maybe they did sign it. Maybe it was the Associated Press and Fox News telling you a different narrative. I'm not going to tell you which one's true. What I'm going to tell you is now as a consumer can make an informed decision about who you want to believe. So we can enable those kind of things. Hopefully that answered the question. Any other questions?
Yeah, so the Chinese government, as an example, seems to be really good at dealing with what they would consider disinformation and especially utilizing their citizenry to help. Do you have any thoughts as to whether examining the Chinese modeling and methodology would be useful in American space?
Elves.
Do you want to take this?
Oh, gee.
All right, I'll take a first swing at this. So it won't work, right? And it won't work because when you talk to the average Chinese citizen, they legitimately believe that the Chinese Communist Party, everything that they do is to protect them from bad outside influence. As Americans, we historically have a healthy distrust of our government, right? And so if the government tried to implement that, we, me included, would immediately shout censorship. So there is some social background and there is some kind of cultural China, pardon the expression, that goes along with that. You have to understand the ins and outs of the society that you're trying to either influence or protect. Solutions that work in China won't work here. Solutions that work in France won't work here, and vice versa. You really have to analyze. Now, if the same solutions were put out by freedom of the press as opposed to the US government, you might find that they have different receptions.
Right, that's
My
kind of
turn.
what I mean. I wasn't getting that exactly from the government, but a similar type of.
Yeah, this is my side of it. So I actually ran a prototype elf campaign a couple of years back, using Australians who had a hell of a sense of humor. So there is a place for citizen-led elf campaigns, but you've got to work at keeping people safe. So there's infrastructure that needs to be put in there. And we figured that this was the important piece of infrastructure to build first. So there's definite place for it.
And there is some of that, right? PolitiFact does some of these things. It just needs to be bigger and broader and address more than just the latest presidential campaign, the latest debate. Let's go over here. Oh, I'm sorry. You've got the microphone. You pick them.
Yeah. Sorry, we were in that one.
I just tried to see if I could make you do shuttle runs back and forth as much as possible.
Have you got a step counter on?
So it was mentioned that the real impact of this is in meat space and in the human mind. Do you have any recommendations on the hardening of that surface? Is there a way to hack my next door neighbor into being more of a skeptic and to critical thinking? Or is, in a follow-up, I would ask is American society in particular susceptible to these sorts of things, given certain large percentages of our population and things they believe?
You Americans are so vulnerable. But there was a lovely, lovely little leaflet put out recently about pineapple on pizza. So one of the 5 Ds is divide. That's his fault. He actually got that 5th D put on. And if you look at pineapple pizza and misinformation, you'll find, I think it's State Department put it out, which was just this beautiful little explain of how it works and just show your neighbors that. That'll help. I think if people know it's happening to them, it helps a little.
So I actually do have a suggestion. Let me first start off by saying we kicked you Brits out once, we'll do it again. Vulnerable indeed. So you have to do things that are uncomfortable. So anybody here not on social media? Okay, good. By show of hands, who intentionally follows people that absolutely infuriate them? Okay, that's less than half the room, for those of you that aren't in the room. You should absolutely follow people that infuriate you to see what the other side sees, right? So if you were an American in the 1980s and you went to the news, you had 3 options. You had ABC, CBS, and NBC. And so you and your neighbor could agree or disagree on how accurate the news was, but at least you saw the same coverage. If you watch the same story on Fox News and on CNN, they look entirely different. There is a vastly different reality. And so we're not even living in a consistent reality where we can have civil discourse. So you should definitely follow people that make you uncomfortable, see what they're saying, and try to at least understand. You don't have to agree with, but understand the argument so that you can have that civil discussion.
Or you could do the extreme thing of spending 6 months driving around the country listening to people, but that's...
Okay, I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. I got 5 minutes left. This gentleman over here has had his hand up for a while.
You mentioned France as being particularly adept at combating these, or they're not susceptible to this. Do you know some of the reasons behind it? And it can't just be they're more skeptical. It must be more subtle, I imagine.
Actually, their educational system is based on skepticism, so they are more skeptical. That does help. Also, they were prepared for it. They watched America and the releases. Their system was set up so they have like a moratorium. Their election had also the hack and release. And they had everything set up. They just were ready for it. They had better techs.
I think we got time for one more. Please, thank you.
Very interesting stuff. I'm interested in the partnerships that you're having with the groups, whether it's your Facebook or your AP, and I can see some possibility that there could be some progress made there where the AP fake news comes out, they can address that. But how do you partner with or address the grassroots groups, your 8chan, your subreddits that are created by or co-opted by nefarious groups?
Yeah, so let me go back a second to that, what I said before about that digital signature of where it comes from. So a couple of things. If you were going to do that in the United States, first of all, it would have to be an open system. Anybody that wanted to apply for a certificate should be able to get one. So if you're a ultra right-wing, horrifying Nazi group and you want a certificate, I'm not going to tell you no, I'm going to give you one. But here's the difference. I said that before. The internet, you had authoritative sources. You couldn't be just anyone and transmit to mass media. Now anyone can transmit to mass media. So really the impetus is on the consumer to look at the source and go, am I going to grant them authoritative status or not? And I'm not going to tell you what that authoritative status is. That is an individual choice. If you want to believe something that you see on 8chan or on 4chan or on a fascist group or on a white...
But those things trickle down into the...
Sure, they trickle down. But again, it's one of those things where you go, okay, well, where did you hear that? Well, I read that from this blog. Okay, I'm not going to grant that blog authoritative, source kind of status. We'll go from there.
We may have a small disagreement. We do sometimes disagree. So
No, we don't.
I believe strongly that everyone has the right to a voice, but they don't have the right to a megaphone.
Yeah.
So that's where I sit on that discussion. So, yeah.
I think we're out of time. Thanks so much for coming. We will be up front.